As we chart our path to recovery, we need a surefire way to get the economy moving again, to create jobs, to help communities across Canada recover. That starts with investing in infrastructure and actually getting projects done. We need more transit, better roads, more rail, more broadband networks across this country. Justin Trudeau loves making promises. He's had years of announcing and re-announcing the money he planned to spend. But 6 years later, he has little to show for it. Il faut plus de transport en commun, plus de transport ferroviaire, des meilleures routes et une connexion Internet haute vitesse partout au pays. Justin Trudeau aime faire des promesses. Il a passé des années à annoncer et à réannoncer les sommes d'argent qu'il prévoit dépenser. Mais 6 ans plus tard, on se demande où sont les résultats. In fact, both the Auditor General and the Parliamentary Budget Officer found that the Liberals failed to get billions of dollars out the door for projects. And it took them months, and in some cases calling an election, to actually commit to nationally significant projects, like Ontario's transit plan for the Greater Toronto Area, Vancouver's SkyTrain extension to Langley, and Calgary's Green Line. A Conservative government will get shovels in the ground on these projects. Through Canada's recovery plan, we will invest billions in key projects that will put Canadians to work, cut commute times, and reduce emissions. Justin Trudeau refuse de soutenir des projets importants comme le troisième lien Québec-Lévis. Un gouvernement conservateur va réaliser ce projet. Un vote pour les conservateurs, c'est un vote pour le troisième lien. Avec le plan de rétablissement du Canada, on va investir des milliards de dollars dans des projets clés. Ces projets d'infrastructure vont créer des possibilités d'emploi, réduire les temps de déplacement et réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. We will scrap the failed Canada Infrastructure Bank and unlock the money sitting there to get infrastructure projects built. We'll review the Investing in Canada plan and other infrastructure programs to make sure they work for local priorities, for our municipalities and First Nation communities, and not just for the priorities of Ottawa insiders. Unlike the Liberals, we won't condition funding so narrowly to whether the project can be described as green infrastructure. We will ensure infrastructure funding maximizes our economic recovery. That means targeting funding to projects that strengthen transit and trade, reduce congestion and gridlock, and advance economic reconciliation with First Nations. And as the last 18 months have made abundantly clear, we need to invest in broadband networks, especially for our rural, remote, and northern communities. Contrairement aux libéraux, on ne va pas imposer de conditions au financement. On ne va pas demander que le projet doit être une infrastructure verte. On va s'assurer que le financement des infrastructures maximise notre reprise économique. Par ce faire, on va cibler les projets qui renforcent le transport en commun, qui créent de la richesse, qui réduisent la congestion routière et qui assurent la réconciliation économique avec les Premières Nations. Et comme les 18 derniers mois l'ont montré, on doit investir pour connecter nos communautés rurales et les régions éloignées à Internet haute vitesse. We will ensure every part of this country is connected to high-speed Internet by 2025 to eliminate the digital divide and ensure every Canadian can participate in the digital economy. We will build world-class 5G networks, and we'll make sure companies like Huawei aren't building them. Our modern infrastructure will be built by Canadians for Canadians. By investing in these strategic projects, a Conservative government will create hundreds of thousands of good jobs, kick our economy into turbodrive, improve the everyday lives of Canadians. Only Canada's Conservatives have a detailed plan to secure world-class infrastructure and get our economy back on track. En investissant dans ces projets, un gouvernement conservateur va créer des centaines de milliers de bons emplois, remettre notre économie sur les rails et améliorer le quotidien des Canadiens. Seuls les conservateurs ont un plan pour agir pour des infrastructures modernes et relancer notre économie. It's time to get shovels in the ground. It's time to get to work. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions. We will now be taking questions. Première question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Ce matin, le Parti libéral a dévoilé sa plateforme qui ne contient pas de plan de retour à l'équilibre budgétaire. Vous promettez un retour à l'équilibre budgétaire en 10 ans, mais vous ne dites pas comment vous comptez y arriver. Vous n'avez toujours pas de plan chiffré. Alors, qu'est-ce que ça vaut, cette promesse que vous faites d'un retour à l'équilibre budgétaire, quand vous n'avez pas de plan chiffré? Comment les gens peuvent-ils vous faire confiance? Quand est-ce que vous allez dévoiler ce plan?
Parce qu'on a un plan pour le rétablissement du Canada après la pandémie.
Mais le plan chiffré?
Un plan avec un plan d'équilibrer le budget au cours de la prochaine décennie. Et on a soumis notre plan immédiatement pour le directeur parlementaire du budget. Dans une élection qui, M. Trudeau, a déclenché en pleine d'une pandémie. On a un plan d'équilibrer le budget, un plan de créer des emplois, d'avoir une loi anticorruption, un plan d'action sur la santé mentale canadienne, un plan d'être plus près dans le futur. C'est dans notre plateforme et les Canadiens méritent un gouvernement qui va agir dans leurs intérêts et pour les projets d'infrastructure, on va livrer. Pas comme M. Trudeau avec des belles paroles.
J'aimerais vous entendre sur le plan chiffré, une date si vous en avez une. Par ailleurs, M. Trudeau promet de mettre en place un projet de loi qui protégerait les propriétaires d'entreprises qui veulent implanter un passeport vaccinal, les protéger légalement. Est-ce que vous pensez que ça va trop loin, cette proposition?
Les vaccins sont très importants. C'est un outil primordial dans notre lutte contre le COVID-19. J'encourage tous les Canadiens et Québécois de se faire vacciner. Et c'est pourquoi, il y a un an, j'ai demandé un approvisionnement suffisant des vaccins. Et en pleine d'une pandémie, la 4e vague, on doit travailler ensemble. Chaque niveau de gouvernement et les entreprises dans le secteur privé aussi. On doit utiliser les vaccins, les tests de dépistage quotidiens, les masques et la distanciation sociale, tous les outils nécessaires pour lutter contre le COVID-19. Et maintenant, nous sommes dans une élection à cause de M. Trudeau et ses intérêts. Je suis ici pour les intérêts des Canadiens.
Next
Repeat
question.
in English, but specifically actually answering the questions on the proposal.
Mr. Trudeau should be focused on the pandemic, working with all levels of government and the private sector using the tools we have to fight COVID-19. He's not done that. We're in an election, in a crisis, not because of the well-being of Canadians, because the Liberal Party wants a majority. I have a plan to work with all levels of government and to make sure our country's more ready in the future, including our 4th pillar of being more prepared, having faster access to vaccines, rapid tests, and other tools. I'll try and work with everyone to fight COVID-19.
Next question.
Mike Lukather from Global National. Mr. O'Toole, the Liberals are very proud to say that they released a fully costed platform today. When are you going to be doing the same?
On the first day of this campaign, I was very proud in this very room to launch Canada's recovery plan, a plan to get our country back to work. We submitted it as soon as we could in an election that Mr. Trudeau called during a pandemic. We see a number of recycled promises and some tweaks to a 2-year budget released today with not a complete plan for our economic recovery as a country. I think Canadians deserve better than that. Mr. Trudeau called the election and just recycled some promises he's already failed to deliver on from the previous election. Canadians are tired of that. We deserve better. We deserve a change. We deserve a government with a plan and one that will deliver. Les Canadiens, les Québécois méritent mieux qu'un gouvernement avec des promesses recyclées dans le plateforme de M. Trudeau. Les Canadiens méritent un plan pour notre avenir, pour les emplois, pour notre économie. Et ça serait mon approche. Un plan d'action et un gouvernement éthique aussi.
So just in my follow-up, if you'd like to answer the first question of when you'll be releasing the costing, I'd appreciate that. But also, a former parliamentary budget officer and top economists are saying that you're making massive assumptions about economic growth in this country in order to get back to a balanced budget without cuts. So my question is, could you please tell us where the cuts will be, or are you saying the budget will balance itself?
Well, first, Mike, we've submitted our platform to the parliamentary budget officer as soon as we could. Mr. Trudeau holds the keys to calling this election. He's doing it for his own narrow interests, not for the national interest. And we will update Canada's recovery plan when the PBO gives us the confirmation back. And we have a goal of growing the economy, 3% growth to get all sectors of the economy back to work and to make sure all Canadians have an economic recovery after COVID-19, not just some, as Mr. Trudeau does. We lost billions of dollars of investment in Canada. We were running massive deficits before COVID-19. So we're going to create jobs and opportunity, build infrastructure that Mr. Trudeau announces but never gets built, and have a detailed plan and a disciplined plan to get spending under control to balance the budget over the course of 10 years. That's our commitment. It's what we're running on, and we will deliver. On a un plan d'équilibrer le budget au cours de la prochaine décennie et on a un objectif de croissance économique de 3% par année. C'est un objectif important parce qu'on doit avoir une relance économique dans chaque secteur de notre économie et dans toutes les régions de notre pays. On a perdu 160 milliards de dollars dans des investissements au Canada avant la pandémie avec M. Trudeau. On a eu des déficits énormes avant la pandémie. C'est pourquoi les Canadiens et les Québécois méritent un plan d'action pour une relance économique et un gouvernement qui va agir sur les projets d'infrastructure et les priorités pour notre pays.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, good morning. Omar Sachedina, CTV News. You say that you will require that equipment and materials for infrastructure be bought from Canadian companies or from countries where there's a mutual agreement between both countries. So which countries would an O'Toole government stop buying from?
Well, we have to work to improve our relationship with the United States. We have one of the oldest and most important trade relationships in the world, and our relationship with the United States is at its lowest point in modern history under Mr. Trudeau. Under 3 presidents, we see Buy American, we see increasing tariffs on softwood lumber, we've seen tariffs on steel and aluminum, we've seen Buy American provisions getting worse. I think we need to partner and improve that relationship. We need to work with the United States, particularly with respect to concerns about global trade with China. That will allow us to have a made in North America, a partnership approach to kickstart our economic recovery.
But you say that you'll only be buying from countries where the materials come from Canadian companies, essentially. So are you essentially now saying that you're putting the U.S. and China on notice?
I want to see less made in China, to be honest with you, and more made in Canada. And I have no hesitation saying that because I've been saying it for several years. We can't sit by and watch a country like China gain from global trade while they don't follow the rules. So we need to start working alongside our allies like the Americans, the Australians, and others who've actually been much more serious with respect to China for many years. Mr. Trudeau has been out of step on this issue. I think we have an incredible ability to improve those trade relationships with our close allies and take a much stronger, more principled approach with respect to China.
Next question.
On doit travailler en étroite collaboration avec nos alliés en ce qui concerne la Chine. Le commerce international, particulièrement pour l'acier et l'aluminium, M. Trudeau était toujours dehors de la ligne avec la Chine. Et j'aimerais voir plus de fabriquer au Canada et moins de fabriquer en Chine, parce que nos travailleurs méritent un plan réel pour une relance économique dans les secteurs stratégiques comme l'acier et l'aluminium, l'auto et les autres. Et on a un plan pour ça dans notre plateforme Et on doit améliorer nos relations avec les Américains, les Australiens, pour le bien-être de notre économie et pour nos valeurs à travers le monde, pour les droits humains. Et ça serait mon approche comme Premier ministre.
Next question.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. Mr. O'Toole, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, he's standing behind Raj Saini, allowing him to run in this election. Saini is facing multiple allegations of inappropriate behavior that he denies. The Liberals say that there's a process in place and that they are taking this seriously. What do you think that Mr. Trudeau should do now and why?
These are very serious allegations and troubling allegations. We need to make sure Parliament Hill is a place where people can come to serve their country, work in politics free from allegations and intimidation and workplace incidents. And this is a pattern with Mr. Trudeau and his office. No accountability and a culture of cover-up. We saw this in the Canadian Armed Forces with multiple allegations that went to the Prime Minister's office, his Chief of Staff, the Clerk of the Privy Council, the Minister of National Defence. Everyone knew except Mr. Trudeau, apparently. Now we see this same culture of cover-up was taking place with their own paid staff members. It's very concerning, and I hope to hear a serious response from the Prime Minister and his team on how this type of cover-up took place.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Tom Parry with CBC. Just want to come back to your economic plan. Have you calculated, once you roll back the one-time spending, the support programs for COVID, have you calculated what kind of a shortfall you're going to be facing in terms of balancing that budget? And if you don't hit your 3% targets, what are you going to target for cuts?
We will hit our 3% target because we're the only party in this race that wants to see an economic recovery for all Canadians in all sectors of the economy, all regions of the country. And we put forward a plan to get our economy surging in the right direction. And Canadians remember, before the pandemic, Mr. Trudeau was running massive deficits, raising taxes, investment and jobs were leaving Canada, and they were increasing government spending by about 7% per year. We have to have an approach to help people get back on their feet after COVID-19, get the economy working, and then have a disciplined approach to get spending under control to balance the budget over the course of a decade. We're taking a very prudent approach here, and Conservatives have done this before. After the global recession, we kept taxes low, we focused on getting people back to work, and we balanced the budget over a period of 4 to 5 years. We're taking a very responsible approach, and Canada's recovery plan details our path out of COVID-19. And I think Canadians, the more they get to see our plan, they know it's exactly what our country needs. On a un objectif d'une croissance économique de 3% par année. On va atteindre nos objectifs parce qu'on va avoir une relance économique dans chaque secteur de notre économie. Nous sommes le seul parti en faveur d'une relance économique dans toutes les régions. Les familles canadiennes, québécois méritent une relance économique et on doit réduire les dépenses dans une manière équitable au cours d'une décennie. M. Trudeau a eu des déficits énormes avant la pandémie. Il a perdu des investissements historiques de 160 milliards de dollars avant la pandémie. On a un niveau de chômage et une pénurie de main-d'œuvre en même temps. Les Canadiens et les Québécois méritent un plan et un gouvernement qui va agir pour leur bien-être.
John Iveson, National Post. Following on my colleague's question, you talk about a disciplined plan to get spending under control, but from what you're saying, you're relying on revenue growth, not on spending restraint. Is that right?
We're relying on both, John. So as I said, before the pandemic, it's hard sometimes to think back to life before the pandemic, but Mr. Trudeau had already run about $100 billion of debt in good economic times. He'd raised taxes and was raising spending unlimited across the board, not strategic, by about 7% per year. So our plan is a balanced one to get our budget back to balance over the course of the 10 years by controlling spending, but making sure up front that we help the country get back on its feet, both economically and, as I've said, from a mental health and a wellness point of view, We want to see an economic recovery and a wellness recovery in all parts of the country and in all sectors of the economy. And we see Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh against most sectors of the economy. Energy, natural resources, manufacturing. Mr. Trudeau said Ontario needed to move past manufacturing. We think all families deserve an economic recovery after COVID, and Canada's Conservatives will have their back.
The Liberal plan this morning has a fully costed platform. We don't have the benefit of your numbers. You're saying that the Liberal Party was spending its spending increases of 7% a year. What are you going to increase spending by per year in the first 5 years?
As I've said, at the first opportunity we had, we submitted Canada's recovery plan to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Mr. Trudeau, who called an election during a pandemic, during forest fires in British Columbia, during the crisis in Afghanistan, put his own interests first. He has really just recycled some promises that he failed to keep from the 2019 election with respect to health care, for example. From what I've seen so far, their cobbled together plan for an election he called is essentially a collection of things from a budget that took them 2 years to create. Canadians are kind of tired of this fly-by-night, never live up to the promises you make, Justin Trudeau. He hasn't delivered on any of his promises related to the deficit, related to transparency, related to safe drinking water. Canadians deserve a government that will actually deliver.
Next question.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole. Menaka Raman-Wilms, The Globe and Mail. In a video of a Zoom call that surfaced from last year, you called Liberal MP Marion Monsef a fraud and a disgrace. Now that you're running for Prime Minister of the country, do you stand by those comments, or would you like to say anything today to Ms. Monsef in regards to those remarks?
Well, sometimes even I let my frustrations boil over with some of the approach, the scandals of the Trudeau government. But as I've said, I'm trying to run a very positive campaign based on the future of our country. I think our best years are ahead of us, but we need leadership. We need a plan to get there. And even I have to step up my game at some points. But as I've said, in this campaign, we've had a positive approach by releasing our plan early and trying to bring people together. Mr. Trudeau has been caught putting out misleading media, picking fights with premiers, pulling things off government internet, trying to divide people in the midst of a pandemic. That's not what we need at a time when we need to be working together, respecting one another, and getting this country back on its feet.
I'll just ask again, do you want to say anything to Ms. Monsef in regards to those remarks?
I've been very disappointed with the government's constant cover-up approach with respect to misconduct, and particularly sexual misconduct and allegations of such in the military. Now we see those coming out with respect to the Parliamentary Hill environment. I'm sure it troubles the minister whose responsibility it is to ensure that their government has a zero-tolerance culture. That will be our approach. And as I've said, I'm trying to make sure we run a very positive campaign based on Canada's recovery plan. I will hold myself to that regard, and I'll hold my team to that same level.
Next question.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. The Liberal platform pledges to enshrine abortion services as publicly funded and medically necessary in the Canada Health Act. Would you support a change to the Canada Health Act that requires provinces to provide publicly funded abortion services?
As you know, I'm a pro-choice member of Parliament and leader of the Conservative Party, and I will always defend the right of women to make health decisions for themselves and always defend the right of access in all parts of the country. I've said that on many occasions during this campaign. I will say it every day to make sure that people can hear loud and clear that the Conservatives are here to stand up for your rights and to make sure we get the country back on its feet with our recovery plan.
The Conservative-leaning premiers of Alberta and Ontario have barely been seen in public or spoken with media in the past 3+ weeks. I'm wondering if you'd welcome Jason Kenney and Doug Ford coming out and showing a little solidarity for your campaign, or are you satisfied that they kind of maintain a minimal public profile until the campaign wraps up here?
As you know, I'm running on Canada's recovery plan. Our team has put a lot of thought and a lot of time reaching out to Canadians, employers, nonprofit organizations, to put forward a plan to get Canada back on its feet. I'm putting that in contrast to Mr. Trudeau, who constantly says nice things and never delivers on literally every economic issue, right through to reconciliation, right through to how he promised to have a government that was transparent by default, and we see a government that is cover-up by default. I'm asking Canadians to take a look at the Conservative Party. We have a new leader, we have a new approach, and we have a plan to get our country back on its feet. And I'll work with anyone of any stripe at any level of government, First Nation leaders, municipal leaders, to fight COVID-19 and to provide opportunity for people in this country, and that will be my style as Prime Minister.
Next question.
Greg Quinn, Market News International. Sir, you did reference what happened to the economy after 2008. The Conservatives moved towards a budget balance. Many global economists thought that governments pulled that stimulus too early, and it led to a recovery that was prolonged and frustrated the jobs recovery. What will you do to ensure that you're not pulling the carpet out from this recovery too soon?
Great question. This is a jobs recovery. We will kickstart an economic recovery based on jobs, based on our job surge, based on helping the highly affected sectors that Mr. Trudeau has ignored, not even met with in some cases. Some sectors are literally holding on by a thread, and other parts of the economy we've seen record profits, and Mr. Trudeau keep those programs in place. We need to target support, target getting people back to work. Our job surge will target people who've been out of work for 10 months or more. We're going to make support changes for EI for people with sicknesses. We're going to support the gig economy and workers there to give them more protection. We're going to fight for Canadian workers and make sure that our economic recovery is a worker-led recovery.
Secondly, on China, the platform has dozens of references to China and getting tough on China, but it's clearly one of the world's dominant economies and diplomatic powers. I wonder how your kind of approach fits with Canada's image of the world of being kind of a nice guy, and if you're really the kind of person that could take on China single-handedly.
Canada is a nice person, and I think we're very proud to not be a belligerent country, but we've always been there for our allies and for our values, from Vimy Ridge to Kandahar. And I've been saying it's been sad to see Mr. Trudeau not there with the situation in Afghanistan. But our allies are actually waiting for a serious Canada to get back on the world stage. Our allies, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the United States, have already made a decision with respect to Huawei in their 5G. Many of our allies, including the United States, have called out the genocide in Xinjiang towards the Uyghur minority population. Mr. Trudeau didn't even show up for the vote. So the world is waiting for that nice Canada to be there on the world stage to stand up for our values, our interests, and our security.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Mr. O'Toole, Janet Silver, iPolitics. You talked a little bit earlier about investing in projects like internet access and providing 5G across the country. We've spoken to some internet providers, and they say that part of the problem is that when governments give the smaller internet providers funds, they sit on the money, they don't invest in the infrastructure, and a few years later they'll sell to the bigger internet providers. So who does the O'Toole government give the money to, and how do you balance that?
That's a great question. Well, we want to tackle spectrum squatting, where people will not actually roll out when they have some of the auctioned spectrum. We need to make sure that is used, and we're going to have policies to do that. Mr. Trudeau has 6 agencies within the federal government all working towards expanding high-speed internet connectivity. There is no focus there. So we're going to have a Minister of Rural Affairs that will shepherd our aggressive and ambitious goal to have high-speed internet connectivity by 2025, 5 years faster than the lackadaisical, unstrategic approach of Mr. Trudeau. And we will partner with the private sector, with municipal utilities in some cases, and with the provinces to kickstart an end to the digital divide.
Mr. O'Toole, you talked a little bit earlier about stepping up your game and how you would hold your team to that same level, but that doesn't seem to be the case with particular candidates, especially Cheryl Gallant. Why not?
I've said Every candidate in this race is running on Canada's recovery plan, which is actually a positive plan to get Canada back on its feet, because we believe that Canada can get back on its feet and tackle issues in our country that are important, including climate change. And every single member of our caucus will be relentlessly focused on that, no exceptions.
It will be all for today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.